Hey, it's Patrick Global Truth Bomb riffing the con on Thursday, February 29th, 2024 at 11:20 a.m. my time. And, we're 250 days out from the presidential election. And I am up to, on subscribers, uh, my YouTube channel, I think it's 878 subscribers. And there are 400, and now I think this is going to be 78 truth bombs. So it's like a 2-to-1 ratio. For every subscriber I have, I've done two truth bombs, which, I don't know what my goal was to begin with when I started this 2 years ago. But maybe because I'm crazy, I thought that I'd have at least thousands. I don't know what I expected. In fact, I don't really know if I cared, to be honest with you. I've been in this situation where I feel like I'm stuck at the end of a maze where the walls are, never ending around me. And I'm like in a padded cell in a white, one of those, those mechanisms that you put on someone so that they can't move. And, I'm sitting here alone, basically broadcasting to the best of my ability the revelations that control not just the United States, but the entire world. And you can argue that, but not really. I mean, at least enough of the world to make sure that the world runs by the way the system is that I'm revealing to you. And I don't know how much longer I can go. I mean, in some ways, I mean, this is part sermon, part, lecture, but in many ways, it's, my own therapy to deal with what it is that I have that can't seem to penetrate the bubble of the tens of millions of people that need to hear this. And what's insane is that the information that I have, that I produced in my work, The Con, that you can find for free at www.thecon.tv, which is the blueprint of how the system of corruption works, that has complete control of our country, that is monumentally larger than everything that occupies our time at the moment, but it's all an extension of the same thing. And yet, because of the nature of media today and the overwhelming insanity of the ocean of madness and lies and deception and diabolical tricks that prevent all of us from understanding what it is that I'm revealing to you, I went on this journey, which was the sum total of a 13-year odyssey where I had to pull the threads of what happened to me in the 2008 great financial crisis to move into position where I did my first documentary film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, really during the wave of Occupy Wall Street. And a couple of years after that, I was able to start investigating what would become the con. And Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream was prologue to everything that we realized in the con. And we released the con in September of 2022, but it was a soft launch. It really didn't pick up steam until we were doing this nationwide distribution deal. And it was a peculiar time, but it happened during the January 6th insurrection. And we predictably got buried by that. Things got weird. We were playing the game the way the game is played internally with professionals. I've been a producer for over 2 decades. We were represented by one of the top agencies in Hollywood, an agency that represents some of the most well-known people, including one in this space. I had the same agent that a wonderful documentary filmmaker, a woman by the name of Ava DuVernay, had. And at one point, there was some effort to try to bring Ava DuVernay to our project as an executive producer because of things that at the time seemed to make sense, that didn't work out. And I can only speculate a lot of the stuff, but one of the oddities about that was that Oprah Winfrey is kind of the sort of the whale, if you will, that was a causality of Ava DuVernay being in the position that she was. Not to take anything away from Ava DuVernay's talent, but it was something that Oprah Winfrey was behind in many ways, and for all the right reasons. But in a peculiar twist of fate, because of what we reveal in the con, which starts with the tragedy of a woman by the name of Addie Polk, who was a 91-year-old African American woman who was the expression of the American dream gone wrong into the American nightmare that now encompasses most of our population, in which she was set up in a horrific fraud scheme where someone was able to steal her home without her knowing about it. And she was on her own after her husband had passed away and she was living on his pension on fixed income, to where the house that she had lived in for decades, which was her security, would ultimately be stolen from her through the methodology of fraud that was happening to create everything that led to what we'll reveal in the con, which, as it turns out, is pretty much the expression and the extension of all of what was on trial in the civil fraud trial with Donald Trump. But because of how the system works and how the power works, particularly in media, that they didn't tell you the full story. And therein lies the situation that we're in. Last night, for example, the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump and his appeal that a president is above the law, for lack of a better sort of connotation, even out of office, which is ridiculous, and everybody knows that. And there's nothing in the Constitution that even comes anywhere close to suggesting that, because there was never a precedent. But it just gives the opportunity for a corrupt Supreme Court to maneuver in a way that they can run out the clock on an investigation by the Department of Justice that reveals that Donald Trump stole the election. Now, what was interesting about that in terms of the reaction last night, and a lot of times you can really see what the smart people really think when things don't go their way, because they're quiet about all of this stuff in advance of a decision of the Supreme Court, because they think maybe there's no way in hell that the Supreme Court was going to rule, in a way that would delay what was happening by way of Donald Trump stealing the election and the Department of Justice case. But of course they did. And why? For the law, to uphold the law, as these guys who are at the apex of the judicial system that have assignments, or not assignments, that they are in their position until they die or they retire, and they're basically the ultimate execution of the law. That they could actually become corrupt. Yeah. And we've seen this over and over and over. I mean, I don't know how many times you have to see that Clarence Thomas has been on the take for a very long time by billionaires, particularly white right-wing billionaires. And it's absolutely insane that an African-American judge would betray all that he is to rise to the highest level of the highest court in the land, to basically be a puppet for right-wing billionaires. It's horrific. And he's married to Jenny Thomas, which now all of the professionals in the game are saying, okay, Jack Smith has no other choice but to actually tell the entire story of the January 6th insurrection and bring indictments against all of those complicit in Congress, and also Jenny Thomas. Yeah, well, that would make sense. Why didn't they do that the first time in the January 6th insurrection hearings? They wanted to lay it all on Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is beating the machine. And what I said last night on Twitter was, what's insane is that here I am trying to penetrate the millions of people that got wiped out in the 2008 great financial crisis, and everybody who's been really hanging on by their fingertips ever since, and that's a vast majority of the country, that what I'm revealing to you is the reality of what's made your world the way it is. And I can give you absolutely concrete evidence of who did what, when, and how to create this situation, all of which is illegal. And I have in these truth bombs over and over and over. I keep revealing the information in addition to what I did in our prescient work, which is the most important. So if you have the time to stop buying lies and you want to wrap your head around the truth that is the lifeline that I'm throwing to you, you can watch it for free, because all Americans buy our lies at www.thecon.tv. And I'm a one-man marketing machine here, which is insanity, because I have no resources. And, I'm reminded of it every day when I open up my truth bombs. I see that YouTube puts front and center this interview that I did with um, Crystal Ball and Sagar Anjanti 3 years ago. It has, I don't know, 67,000 views. Not one of my truth bombs has got anywhere close to that. I think the most I've ever achieved is 1.5 thousand views on some incredibly important truth bombs, but I'm just not penetrating the audience. And I'm not smiling either. I don't know how to express this sense of absolute insanity of literally being in this padded cell, where I'm got my arms and my mouth covered and everything else, and I'm looking at this world that I can't penetrate because they've sequestered me, and your own interpretation is made it impossible for you to understand what's going on. It's like when I deliver the truth, it's a foreign language. I may as well be speaking alien, where you have no idea what it is that I'm talking about, because most of our society has been indoctrinated that the only way you can respond or react is one way or the other, depending on where your tribe is in the silos of which everybody is kind of branded how you should respond to certain things. And it's absolute insanity. And so, for example, going back to this whole, Supreme Court decision on allowing the case to be heard, I think they sent it back to the lower court, which is going to kill some time, and it's going to come back. Basically, they're running on the clock on the trial of Jack Smith to prove Donald Trump's criminal, scenario by all things the insurrection, so that we can't, as a country, hear this before the election, which of course is to obfuscate justice. Have you ever seen that meme where the Statue of Liberty is laying on her back and there's like hands over her mouth and blinds over her eyes, that sort of thing? Yeah, that's what the Supreme Court is doing because it's corrupt. Because what, six of the justices were basically forced down, the processes that be to actually, assign or give us the Supreme Court justices by none other than Mitch McConnell, the ultimate devil incarnate, who just announced that he's finally, after we saw him on the floor of the House last year, at one point, just, be frozen silent, forgetting what he was doing and where he was, like he was in another world, probably because of his age. And so finally, he's announced retirement when it's him that was behind the scenes that railroaded the United States on behalf of the oligarchy or whomever was paying him, which his wife was involved with China, by the way. And okay, wow, right? And my point was on X last night. Here I am trying to reveal to you tens of millions of felonies that I have the evidence of, that led to tens of trillions of dollars that I have the evidence of, that was looted and stolen by this system that I'm revealing to you day in and day out, that is the ultimate control that puppeteers everything else. And everything else is a consequence and a reaction to make sure that you do not understand how the power works, which is what I am revealing to you. And I'm banging my head in this, white padded cell, be completely paralyzed, where I cannot get this information to you with 250 days left in the election. And what is it that I'm trying to do if you're just hearing this for the first time? I'm trying to create a revolution to purge corruption and end the fascism that it fuels, because none of it is what we are supposed to be as a nation of, by, and for the people that was born from a revolution to create separation of powers, to create the integrity of law, to hold absolute power to account, which it's not, which is because of what I'm revealing to you. We don't have separation of powers. The Supreme Court is corrupt to its eyeballs. Congress is corrupt to its eyeballs. And yeah, the presidency is corrupt to its eyeballs. Or in Joe Biden's, sort of formulation, It just does the work of the machine that is corrupt to its eyeballs. So therefore, you don't have a country of, by, and for the people. You have a country of and for by the corruption of a myriad of corrupt corporations. And it's just insane theft and payday and revolving door and guys that are working for the Borg that are destroying and betraying us all. And yet, you as an American citizen don't have time or the bandwidth to fully appreciate it or understand it or actually do something about it. Guys, I've seen many of you make comments on my truth bombs where it's like, yeah, I've got a 2008 story. Yeah, everybody knows what happened in 2008 or some variation. First of all, nobody knows what happened in 2008. And if you've got a story, do you understand what happened to you and what it means and why what happened 13 years ago is more alive today and has never been dealt with than ever before? Nothing has changed. This is our system. And so, what are you going to do? Tell me your story? How about tell everybody else what it is that I'm revealing and spreading it like your life depends on it to actually make you whole, to legitimize you, to do your part to help us push back against this system of insane corruption? And I'll give you an example. I give you a million examples, but I'll start with this one. So, for those of you who want to believe everything that mainstream media is telling us through the courts, particularly as it relates to all things Donald Trump, that, and there are millions of you who want to and who are on the side of the argument. And of course, you're going to vote that way. That, for example, Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, and Judge Ergeron proved that justice can prevail. And in fact, out of the lips of Letitia James, this proves in her uh, proclamation that nobody's above the law and that now markets were saved, which is utterly ridiculous. Why? Because Mr. Fabulous, or I think that's his self-pronounced name, Mr. Fabulous Kevin O'Leary, the Canadian, I guess, billionaire from Toronto, who's, I think, just such a jerkwad. It's unbelievable. But yet he goes on television on CNBC and MSNBC and Fox, and, or not MSNBC, but Fox and whatever else. And, you know, he says things, he said the quiet part out loud. What Trump got indicted for and convicted of in terms of the actual fines that are going to bankrupt him. And he's also trying to play that out. And that was the good news yesterday, that no, he's not going to be able to pay $100 million to, you know, to be able to, what's the word when you appeal that decision? He's not going to be able to. So he actually might run out to go bankrupt before he runs out the clock and then becomes president again. In his world, that doesn't matter because getting into the presidency whitewashes all of the other indictments against him. And then, yeah, he can be as corrupt as he wants to be with countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia and whomever else wants to pay to play for a United States that's so weak and cowardly and pathetic that we could allow that to happen, which is happening right before our eyes. But getting back to Letitia James and Judge Ergeron, that the convictions that Donald Trump, you know, is facing in terms of these fines and maybe the embarrassment not being able to, you know, do business in the state of New York for the next 3 years and all of those types of things does not protect and save markets. Donald Trump was a tiny player in the big picture of how this whole thing works. And I've watched hours and hours and hours of media reflection, particularly MSNBC, which is like watching high school for me, where they talk about what they want you to hear, but they don't reveal the big picture. And at times I'm like, maybe they just don't know the big picture. But then all of a sudden, you know, there's this interview with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last week where Alex Wagner basically props her up as this heroine that brought the idea in these hearings several years ago, congressional hearings with Michael Cohen, that was the Trump organization hyperinflating its asset values, which apparently, according to Alex Wagner and this piece that she did, would domino what Letitia James did. That, you know, for the New Yorkers, it's like, oh, wow, look at what this young, you know, representative did on behalf of New Yorkers, and now she's going to run for Senate. Okay. Meanwhile, I put all of the information of the con in front of her, which reveals what all of mainstream media has not revealed to you. of why the banks loan to people like Trump or organizations like Trump or to tens of other millions of people in a similar situation under the same circumstances. I saw it said on MSNBC, I don't know how many times, that could you imagine if the entire real estate economy of this country operated the same way? It would collapse. And it did. It did. And it destroyed tens of millions of Americans. And it's created this chaos that we're in the midst of, and it never ended. Why didn't it end? Because we gave the guys that set up the world and the largest criminal conspiracy, financial criminal conspiracy in the history of the world, that never ended, because we gave the guys that did it, the CEOs of our financial system, tens of trillions of dollars in the aftermath of failing completely. Again, Donald Trump, $500 million. To boot, what I'm revealing to you, $70 trillion. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. You're not listening to me. You don't understand what's at stake. There's a tiny sliver of the populace that revolves around a revolving door that has complete control of the system. And the mega merger happened because of two massive scenarios that happened in our government. The first is deregulation that destroyed laws called Glass-Steagall that would prevent gambling with other people's money, which is what led to the Great Depression, because we separated commercial banking from investment banking. You have to have banking. You have to have finance. There's no question about that. But not to the point where the guys that have all of the control at the apex of the too big to fail financially important institutions, and the asset managers and the private equity guys, and all of the big private wealth firms and everything else, where they're in complete control of the money for themselves, that can feed off of endless money from the Federal Reserve. That's all done illegally. That's the smoke and mirrors. Imagine, if you will, seriously, I want you to consider this, because this is the ultimate analogy. Imagine you're into debt up to your ears. How many of you are talking to your wives right now about how you're going to get to the next month because of all the bills you have to pay, because you've got 3 jobs and you're hanging on by your fingertips, and it's like you can't keep up with all the debt that you have? And then you might be looking at other things downstream, like how are we going to pay for Johnny's college tuition and all the rest of it, when our credit rating's going down because we're maxed out and we don't have enough income to pay for it. And what happens if things happen to go sideways? Oh, we're in deep shit. Imagine if you could just flip a switch, and then suddenly you pay all of your debt, and then you can go out and get more debt, and then pay all of that debt, and then, oh wow, it never ends. Oh wow, then you can actually take out as much debt as you want, loan it to other people, and then set them up on tricks where you get fees all along, and you get fees from basically setting them all up to fail. And then when they all fail, you still get endless amounts of money. That's what our financial system does. That's what they do, and that's how they have complete control of the world. Do you not understand what I am telling you? Do you think that the law is equal? The government can't even hold to account, based on what we all saw with our own eyes, something that is, if you read even one paragraph of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, you understand exactly what the constitutional amendment laid out, because they just had a civil war to try to fight for a country of, by, and for the people, by ending bondage at that time, only to, over 100 years later, wind up with debt bondage. So what's your issue? And where are you in the panoply of all of these things, given that we're 250 days away from the election? Is Donald Trump going to be the salvation to our problems? No, of course not. For MAGA, what he's going to do is destroy everybody that doesn't look or sound like them, create basically a fascist state where there is no law, which means that the American experiment is over. and democracy is dead. Now, I'll remind you that I've said this a million times. Democracy has been dead for a very long time, at least the last 20 years, maybe longer, but at least the last 20 years. It's completely rigged by this system, but you cannot understand what is happening to you because you keep getting played as a tool in the full circus to go one way or the other, or to be in this fiefdom of tribes and silos. So maybe you put on a made in China hat, that says MAGA, and you're with all of your white friends that are in your churches, and you wear your American flags, T-shirts made in China, and you think you're a patriot because why? You're protecting the border. I saw a picture yesterday of the border, and I grew up in Texas. I understand all of the border issues, and I have my whole life. And I can tell you, I went to, grew up in Texas, went to college in Arizona, and lived in California for quite a while. So yeah, I understand the border. And I saw this big sort of picture. I think it was a drone flying over the walls, and it was actually it was an Elon Musk, tweet, because Elon is all about the border and all of the threats of the border. Meanwhile, you see the trucks going in and out because we created a thing called NAFTA back during the Clinton administration, the free exchange of goods, where American corporations could go farm out, you know, um, basically what our industry was producing before, create products that we consume in places where there are no regulations on environmental impact or taxes, or they just have to pay off corrupt guys and then pay people like pennies on the dollar, and basically use automation to produce whatever products are coming in over the border that are porous, that have destroyed all the jobs in the United States. And yet all of these migrants that can't, live anywhere else are trying to migrate to the United States, where of course, we're seeing all over the place that places like, New York City are offering them $1,000 a month. Supposedly, I just saw this out of the corner of my eye. I don't have no idea if this is true or not, but to basically, try to survive while they're trying to figure out what they're doing, even though they're not even American citizens. Meanwhile, how many homeless people do we have in the United States? And yet Elon Musk, this guy who is, ultimately the sort of pharaoh of globalism, is like, oh my God, we've got to fight the immigration. And it's got all of these patriotic truckers in the border, and they got their guns, and they can play army guy. Most of them probably never were in the military, but they've got this like, sort of pseudo patriotism for what? To protect American borders because our jobs are going to those countries. It was the corporations that did this with their accountants and their attorneys and their high level lobbyists and their politicians that they own, that destroyed the golden goose in the American dream decades ago. And what did we replace it with to become this consumption nation? Debt. That's what the whole thing is debt. And we're as the United States, we're the global reserve currency, and the dollar is what everybody trades in. And so we can use that as a weapon, and we can keep financing and keep people in debt. And that's what we've done over and over and over through this smoke and mirrors schemes that ultimately have this financial apparatus that operates to the way I just described to you. Literally, imagine if you can turn on a switch and all of your debts are gone, and you've got more money to get into more debt, and it never ends. And you can lie, steal, and cheat and destroy people, and you can still get paid. That's what our financial system is doing to us. It's tyranny. It's above the law. How do I know this? Because I created the con, and I've been involved with it every day since. And I've been desperately trying to get your attention to understand the confluence of it all. And I never thought it was complicated. It's so easy. Back in the, I don't know, 2000s, 2002 to 2006, there were brokers that just made up numbers on loan applications to get people approved because they got paid fees to do it, and they were incentivized by the guys up above in this whole, assembly line of fraud. And who were the guys above? Ultimately, the CEOs that were getting paid more based on what we call modern executive compensation and short-term profits that were all built on sawdust because they were selling liars loans. They were selling, as ridiculous as it sounds, they were selling $700,000 houses to people that were immigrants, and these are probably MAGA guys now, right? With their red MAGA hats made in China, and they're, they've got they've got their big truck that they've got on debt that they got from the Ford dealership, their big 1F50 truck, and they've got their what are they're called? When you go in the water, they're kind of like motorcycles in the water, and I can't even think of that name because my head's swimming with so much stuff. Because I put 30 minutes, time myself because I don't want to really go over 30 minutes. So I'm going to try to bring this to a close. Those guys that were flipping houses to these Mexican immigrants based on liars loans to where they get these huge fees, and they were doing it to everybody, were these guys that were saying they're making over $150,000 a year and getting these loans approved. All they had to keep them in these like really low entry level, negative amortization payment scheme for 90 days. And that's all they had to do to get their fee. And they did that with tens of thousands, if not tens of millions, tens of thousands in California for sure at this time period. But by the time we got to 2006, what the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission had revealed in all of these investigations, that we had all of the information that 80% of the loans were liars loans at this time. And who were they funded by? They were funded by these warehouse lines that came from these giant investment banks like Goldman Sachs. They knew exactly what they were doing because they bet short on the market because they knew the whole thing was going to blow up. That's called the Big Short. And it was much bigger than what we saw in Brad Pitt's The Big Short. Everything is covering up what I'm revealing to you, which is on display at www.thecon.tv. And so you've got these arrogant, twisted freaks that are these mortgage brokers that were making all of this money lying. And then the whole world blew up. And then ultimately, a lot of these guys, to be honest with you, got involved in servicers and then basically, recalibrating the liar's loans process into the liar's foreclosures process to where they were foreclosing on all of these homes because of the nature of how it worked, for example, in California, because it's a non-judicial state, and they worked behind the scenes so that they wouldn't muck up the courts. They used what they call trustees, so that they could fast track the foreclosure process using illegal documentation fraud and illegal foreclosures to houses they didn't have the right to. But then the banks that were at the apex of this whole thing were hiring trustees to work for them to fast track this stuff to know where nobody was doing discovery. So millions of people got foreclosed on illegally by entities that didn't have the right to foreclose on them. Why? How? Because we gave tens of trillions of dollars to the banks to basically clean up the system, and they did by stealing from everybody. And then what did they do in the meantime? 2016 to 2018, they basically created zombie companies. And then they did the same thing with liar's loans and mortgage-backed securities. They did the same thing with commercial real estate. And it wasn't just the too big to fail banks at this time. By the time we get to 2018, 2019, it was all the regional banks. But then what happens? Well, unbeknownst to most of you, there was a huge run in what we call the repo markets, which stemmed from some sort of run from SoftBank in Japan. It was part of one of this primary dealer network around the world that created this run that was almost the exact same run that took place in 2008 based on repos. And we had to shell out through the Federal Reserve another $22 trillion to stabilize the market to all of these freaking pirates in the financial system. And then what happened right after that? COVID. And everybody was in on it. PPP loan fraud. I mean, my God, the fraud was huge, but how many trillions went into this whole system? The guys that have access as the primary dealer brokers and all of these scheming guys. And then, of course, we ended up with inflation. And a lot of people were blaming inflation by what? Socialism, because we gave people $1,600 checks. Meanwhile, as it turns out, the top 1%, had the equivalency because of the stimulus of over $980,000 in their bank accounts. Direct infusion. And that was just that part of the house. The real infusion was the stimulus with free money when you had 0% interest and free money that you could then take out loans to buy real estate. But the primary dealer brokers and all of these huge networks basically were purchasing all the commercial backed securities, and they were selling them back to the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve was spending $180 billion a month up until just recently. And I haven't looked at some of the Fed Reserve charts recently. So I don't know where we are in what's supposedly quantitative tightening, but that's where, they're trying to unload, the Federal Reserve's trying to unload all of these securities on the global bond market based on everything that I've just revealed to you. But you put all of those figures together, we're north of $70 trillion to a tiny apparatus of people that have complete control of the world, and the entire United States is subservient through the revolving door to this system of kings and pharaohs. And here Patrick Lovell is trying to lead an exodus against corruption to resurrect the American dream. How? Through what we call the Clean New Deal. We're 250 days away from the presidential election. My colleague Kevin Howard convinced me, and I'm convinced he's right, that the only thing that we can actually do to turn the tables at this moment is to find a presidential candidate who has all of the information that I have and makes the case to the American people. And then ultimately, if he wins or she wins, gets in to do two things simultaneously. One is to actually put all of the information that we have together in front of the American people and use the bully pulpit to force, as best as that person can, an investigation to elevate above the noise of obfuscation and lies and deception of Hanoi Jane Rachel Maddow, who's all in on the communication, who's all in as the communication director of the Democratic Party, to basically make everything about Trump. And yeah, Trump is everything that they say he is. But justice for Trump doesn't mean justice for the American people. Trump is nothing in comparison to what I am revealing to you. Absolutely nothing. And this impacts the globe. And this presidential candidate would have to do the investigation, would have to, if the investigation goes the way it's supposed to, as we've seen for the situation with Judge Curran and Letitia James in the case of Donald Trump, yeah, they can take over the property of Donald Trump if he doesn't pay up. And he loses. That's one of the many things that could be done by the Department of Justice that has resources infinitely beyond the AG's office of New York. And I have all the answers of how to do that. I work with all the guys that have done it before. I know who the people are who could do this the right way. In fact, I'd say that a vast majority of employees that work for the federal government and all of the agencies that are supposed to protect us in these institutions are the good guys. The problem is the rotting corruption that evolves from the political appointments at the apex of all of these agencies that can destroy the investigation, just like we saw from the Supreme Court in the case of Donald Trump appealing that he's above the law, even when he's out of the presidency. That's how it works. And so that has to be the first order of business. But simultaneously, you need to understand, and I need to make the case to the world to get above the madness of the noise and confusion, the distortion racket, and all of the bad guys that are in control, because those that are competing for control are the Democrats with the Wall Street meritocracy that have been in control for the last 5 decades, for the most part, and 4 decades at least, but going back to Clinton more importantly. And of course, through Obama, which created all this madness. I mean, all of it created this madness. But and they're the ones who prop up the system versus the challengers, which are really just it's corporate fascism versus real cultural fascism. Those are our choices, neither of which are America. I'm telling you, I've got the answers. And so this presidential candidate is going to have to make the case, but then simultaneously, we need to make the case to the American people that they got away with $70 trillion since 2009. And that's a baseline to pivot to what needs to happen. The problem is the powers that be that have been in control for decades, they will not relinquish control. They've got an iron grip on power and control and the money mechanism that keeps everything in control that's predicated mostly on fossil fuel and the military industrial machine, which is why we have all of these scenarios throughout the world. Yeah, it is geopolitics, and it is about resources, and it's about who controls them for what reason. And the big trick of the United States, primarily, I think, through the CIA, and the CIA plays a huge part of this, particularly in what I'm telling you. Look, Sullivan and Cromwell was at the apex of working for what they called the consortium. A guy by the name of Raj Goen was working with, revealed in an investigation by the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, which I have the information, that he said the reason why they had expanded Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to be able to provide trillions of dollars of liquidity to a bankrupted, insolvent financial apparatus, which is exactly what the statutes say you don't do, but particularly because they all got that way through racketeering based on what we show you in the con, which is called control fraud, which is just racketeering mostly. And the powers that be, circle the wagons, got behind the scenes and just lied to us. And the media lied to us, which is why I made the con, which is why they've got me sitting in a padded cell, basically where I can't do anything and my mouth is gagged, and they've got me suppressed. The only way that this message is going to get out is if you spread the word and if you believe it. And if you don't believe it, delve in, find out what I'm saying, compare it to everything else that's going on. If there was a free market of ideas where the American people actually cared about liberty and justice for all, actually cared about the integrity of law, actually cared about free markets and dynamism and everything that made us a superpower, and they were real patriots, then they would come with me by the tune of millions and we would destroy corruption that is destroying everything else. That's what would happen. But that's why the system has to keep me muzzled and has to keep me silent and has to suppress me. But the way the algorithms work is if you pick up the torch and you start carrying it and you bring people to me and you spread this and you share the word and you become a zealot for truth just like I am, because the truth is the savior. Guys, we are a sinking Titanic of insanity. And for anybody who's been around and who believes in America, and who would lay their life down for America, would do so by being liberty and justice for all and a patriot for truth and justice and the right thing. The world is spinning out of control. I could go on for another 2 hours about Gaza. I could go on for another 2 hours about what's happening in Ukraine. I could go on for about another 2 hours between all of the things that are happening in Taiwan and China and how the BRICS countries and all the rest of it. Those are all elements that I've got answers to as well. But as it relates to 250 days and counting, and I don't know how much left I've got in me. I think I'm going to go till the end of April. I think that's what I'm going to do. And if I can't get your attention to the tune of, look, if I can get to 10,000, we can get to 1 million. If we can get to 1 million, we can get to 10 million. If we can get to 10 million, we can get to 100 million. And in today's sort of scenario with immediate communication, if we could overcome that which is overcoming us, we could make that happen like that. But I think that the mile marker is I've got to see at least 10,000 people that are on board. And they got to understand that the ultimate march, as it has been with the United States in times past, is what we have created, the clean New Deal. The New Deal did this for the greatest generation. And I was reminded by this wonderful film that I saw about Yanis Varoufakis called In the Storm, where Yanis had revealed that in the aftermath of World War II, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt in America brought all the allies and all the world together during a conference at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to basically lay out what the global economic order was going to be, they didn't allow bankers in. They didn't want bankers to overtake it like they have ever since. Man, I'm telling you, I never thought of it in the past. And because listen, I'm very sensitive about this. I'm Jewish, and I'm not really a practicing Jew. I'm more culturally Jewish than anything else. I come from a mixed background. But yes, I do proclaim my heritage because there's a lot of things about Judaism to me that are absolutely magnificent, particularly Exodus, above all else, to be honest with you. But the law as well, because that's what Exodus led to in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, which is the way that civilization is supposed to organize that doesn't bow to kings or pharaohs. That's what creates the dynamism of a democratic society. Now, yeah, okay, the 4 out of the 10 commandments were just bowing to God. Okay, so there's that. But the rest of it was common sense for the most part, okay? Don't kill, don't steal, don't cheat. I mean, don't we know that? But in terms of the presidential candidate, yeah, you got to have the investigation, but you've got to understand $70 trillion went to these bad guys. And we've got to break out of this dependence on this fossil fuel paradigm that undergirds what is the financialization of the world that leads to this military expansionism, and some people like to call it venturism. And what I'll tell you is what we've seen since 9/11 is that our military contractors And I've been to the estates in Potomac, Maryland, and Chevy Chase, Maryland, where I see Richie Rich estates of guys that are, these contractors for these giant military machine apparatuses, be it Lockheed Martin or Carlisle Group or whatever else. These guys are rich, making tons of money, and have a lot of power to pay off politicians to keep it going. And ultimately, it's not to win. It's to continue the war cycle. We've been in it for 20 years. Did we go after the people that did 9/11, that attacked us on 9/11? No, we did not. Was Afghanistan a win? No, it was a perpetuation of the problem. I know guys that were in Afghanistan that were privy to dropping off barrel loads and truckloads of cash to warlords just out of thin air. And it's like, what were we fighting for at that stage of the game? To end terrorism? No. As seen in what we're seeing in Hamas and Gaza and all the rest of it, it's like the Israelis would have the saying over the last 20 years or so where it's like, yeah, we're going to mow the grass, which I always found horrific. And what's happening in Gaza right now is unbelievable. And this guy, Aaron, whose name eludes me because I haven't seen him in a lot of conversations, excuse me, in the mainstream media, but Aaron Bushnell. I read an incredibly compelling piece from Chris Hedges this morning, and I'll just, give you a couple of highlights here. He said that his death pitted divine violence against radical evil, and he gets to this quote that Kevin had said yesterday in one of our truth bombs. He said, "I will no longer." This was Aaron Bushnell. "I will no longer be complicit in genocide." He said, "I'm about to engage in extreme act of protest, but compared to what the people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is the ruling class hasn't decided that will be normal." And then he went on to say, "What would I do? What would we do if we were alive during slavery or Jim Crow or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is you're doing it right now." Um, and then there was another paragraph that caught my eye. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Yeah. So Chris Hedges goes on and he says, young men and women sign up for the military for many reasons, but starving, bombing, and killing women and children is not amongst them. Shouldn't in a just rule that the U.S. fleet break the Israeli blockade of Gaza and provide food, shelter, and medicine? Shouldn't the U.S. warplanes impose a no-fly zone over Gaza to halt the saturation bombing? Shouldn't Israel be issued an ultimatum to withdraw from Gaza? Shouldn't the weapons shipments, billions in military and intelligence provided to Israel be halted? Shouldn't those who commit genocide as well as those who support genocide be held accountable? Look, man, we're at a new level of insanity. Israel has to exist from where I'm sitting. But the way they're doing it right now is genocide, and it's driving me absolutely insane. I saw swastikas imprinted, side by side with Stars of David. I never thought I'd see something like that in my life. And it's working both for people that are anti-Israel and not or pro-Israel. And you know, a lot of my positioning on this whole thing, in addition to what I was talking about, the military contractors, and I've watched closely everything that's happened in Israel my whole life, and I've always been on the side of Israel, and I'm still on the side of Israel existing as a democratic state, and it's a very, very difficult situation. And I do know that Hamas had been building tunnels and involved with all sorts of stuff, that never wanted to have a two-state solution either. And so the extreme forces won, and now we're in the midst of war. And yet, to Chris Hedges' point, and also, this this horrific self-immolation that occurred, that you're not seeing really in mainstream media. They're not even touching it. Even though I think I saw yesterday on the front page, or maybe this morning on the front page of the New York Times, that those that were waiting for aid were fired upon. It's insanity. The whole world is insanity. It's insanity that this is happening, and it could engulf and spread and go further. But in the end, I swear to God, and there's no way there's no right thing to say about this other than it should stop. The genocide should stop. But this is what happens when, actually, that is the point that I want to make. You know what to me the most important point of all of this is? Do you think that the Palestinian citizens that are innocent, that we presume to be innocent, women and children that had nothing to do with Hamas and everything else, those that were just trying to live every day and just trying to survive and what they do in their school and their education and their place of worship and everything else, that, they're not foot soldiers in Hamas, right? And so the idea is that they shouldn't suffer. That's what Chris Hedges and that's what everybody who's anti-Israel and anti-Gaza and the slaughter and genocide say, right? But think about yourself in this situation because you're ignoring everything I'm telling you, right? Let's say, for example, because they couldn't control the terrorist apparatus within Hamas, and they couldn't control the outcome, that they are being collectively punished. And yeah, it seems to me that the Israelis have had this plan, at least those on the far right, with Likud and everybody that's been funded by Sheldon Adelson and that sort of thing over the course of the last couple of decades, that they at some point were like, screw the two-state solution. We want an all-out war. And that's what they're in the midst of right now. They want an all-out war. They want to drive the Palestinians out of Gaza, and then they want to drive probably the Palestinians out of the West Bank. They probably want to drive Hezbollah out, and they do want a regional war. They do. That's what it looked. That's all of their actions are saying. And the United States is like, yeah, go ahead, and maybe we do too, for whatever reason. Maybe we finally want World War III. It seems like we've been involved with World War III since 9/11 to me. But okay, this is what happens when the citizens aren't involved. If the citizens didn't want an outcome on both sides, and same with the powers that be, they wouldn't have allowed it. They wouldn't have allowed October 7th to happen. Okay, now you might say to yourself, they didn't have any power to stop it. Okay, but what about you? I'm giving you all of the information that there is a powers that be at the top of the strata that are completely destroying us by stealing from us the full faith and credit of the United States illegally to prop up all of the stuff and this madness around the world. And the media is lying to you. And what are you going to do? Are you just going to sit there and do nothing? Or are you going to go into camp with Trump to go into cultural fascism? Or are you going to stay in the camp of Biden, which isn't going to fix what I'm saying? Nor, my God, Biden gave us Merrick Garland. And is the economy rolling right now? No, it's not rolling. It's a facade. There's so many different tricks of the trade that these guys are involved with. Look, when you do nothing, catastrophe can happen as signified by what we're seeing in Gaza. Do you want to twist that to say, it's going to create an emotional sort of like conundrum, but I promise you, look, Donald Trump is just going to create more corruption for himself, and he's going to create if you think things are bad now, they can get worse under Trump. Biden is just the status quo. And yes, I do think he is too old, even though I think he's a better option than Trump. I still think that he's too old, and I think that the system is the system, and I need to break the system. Okay? RFK is not critical of Donald Trump, and I believe he is getting support from Russian crypto initiatives, which ties him to Steve Bannon and other things, which I think his entire role is to basically split the Democratic vote and make it harder for Trump or Biden to win. Okay, first and foremost, although many of you would say Gaza is going to be a huge part of that and other things that are happening, probably Ukraine and blah, blah, blah. And then Cornel West. Does Cornel West have answers? No, he doesn't. Cornel West is just a very smart combination of street poet and philosopher slash theocracy expert. Not theocracy expert. What am I trying to say? I mean, not theocracy. Sorry, I can't remember exactly what he has a PhD in, but he's not a threat to corruption. Nobody is a threat to corruption. Marianne Williamson, is she a threat to corruption? Nobody's going to tell you what I'm telling you. This is what undergirds it all. The guy who's the closest, who makes the most sense to me that I've ever heard, is a guy by the name of Yanis Varoufakis, but he's not an American. And there's other elements. I'm not going to say that I don't agree with. I agree with everything that he's saying, but maybe I'm the guy that needs to run for the presidency out of nowhere, because I have all of the information and access because of what I've done as an independent producer. And yeah, I've done what is my credibility? What have I done? What the entire system has lied to you about. And I have uncovered it. Am I an expert in economics? No, I didn't need to be to get the answers to what I revealed. And what you need to understand is that the financial system has been looting nonstop through bailout after bailout after bailout that created a casino gambling international network based on schemes and frauds. And you saw this during COVID, for example. All of you saw crypto go through the roof, and all of the Bitcoin and all of the different scenarios with meme stocks, and all of the guys that got into AMC, and of course, more importantly, into GameStop. They all realized the system is completely rigged. Why? Because Stephen Cohen at Citadel had complete control, and he used his leverage at the SEC to basically fend off what everybody that was, driving the price of GameStop up had learned based on what the hedge fund guys had taught them. And they realized, no, there are no market. Capitalism doesn't exist, just like democracy doesn't exist. Is this my announcement for the presidency of the United States? No, this is my announcement for the Clean New Deal that we have to understand, as it has been for the last 2 years, pretty much. $70 trillion has been looted, and that is a beginning point that we have to reshift the paradigm of our energy infrastructure, and we don't have to look for the money to do it. I'll bring in the economists that know exactly how to do this, but we have to have a guaranteed jobs program that brings in the opportunity to transition people out of Uber and all of these kind of ridiculous ways of earning money at Grubhub and the rest of it, to where you have an option where you don't have to have 3 jobs apiece to try to barely stay afloat, to where we can actually recreate an infrastructure where we rebuild the middle class by rebuilding the infrastructure of the paradigm grid, transfer to complete renewable in the United States to lead the world to do it. And yeah, build a high-speed train infrastructure network as well, and so many other things that could come from this. It's the combination of everything that took place to create trust busting and the New Deal. This is the clean New Deal. I am a modern day Ferdinand Pecora that has the answers that reveal the $70 trillion truth that the $44 million a year Rachel Maddow has been lying to you about for the last 13 years. And Donald Trump is not the end all be all. We have to fight a two-front war against the corruption and the fascism that is cultural on the MAGA side, and we have to fight the more existential war of the financial system that has complete control of our entire government. Everything is on the line. If you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency, integrity and sustainability and beauty, if we merge in unity, we can destroy the iron grip and tyranny of misery, and that is our destiny, and it's called the Clean New Deal. Rise, roar, revolt. Failure is not an option. This is the Clean New Deal. This is the righteous grind. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. People, I'm telling you, you have to share me. You have to get this word out there. We have to break the grip of the Borg. This is the information. I have it. Join me, private message me, get other people involved, become an activist for truth. I'm not the savior. The truth is.